Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really taking a big leap into a world that's just so critical if you're working in 3D art, animation, visual effects, GPU rendering.
It really is. I mean, the render engine you use, the GPU behind it, that basically dictates how fast you can work, yeah. And, the complexity, the quality you can actually hit. It's fundamental.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've gathered quite a stack of sources. We've been digging through recent performance benchmarks, lots of expert discussions, analysis from places like TechGauge and Blender Guru, some insights from AminoCast, and a briefing document that kind of pulled a lot of this together for us.
Yeah, and our goal here really is to cut through all the, the tech specs and the benchmark charts. We want to pull out the most important bits of knowledge to help you figure out which GPU, which render engine, or maybe, a mix of them might be the best fit for the kind of creative stuff you do.
Because, let's be honest, comparing all this stuff fairly, the experts we looked at, they called it a mammoth task.
Oh, definitely. So many variables.
So yeah, let's unpack what they actually found.
Okay, so if we look at the GPU landscape right now for rendering, especially comparing AMD Radeon and NVIDIA GeForce cards, well, the sources, they kind of paint a pretty clear picture. NVIDIA seems to have a real significant advantage currently.
Right, and it's not just like a tiny edge, is it? It sounds like it comes down to some specific tech they've built in.
That's exactly it. The key thing the sources keep pointing to is NVIDIA's dedicated ray tracing cores, their RT cores, and their optics API. These things give performance improvements that, well, as one expert put it, they're pretty much impossible to ignore sometimes. They can dramatically improve rendering performance.
Okay, so where does this advantage really show up in the tests you looked at?
Well, take Blender Cycles Engine, for example. Just enabling optics on an RTX GPU. It can make it feel like you just upgraded your GPU. That's a direct quote. And here's a really surprising bit. One test actually showed an RTX 3060 Ti, a mid-range card with optics turned on, actually beating AMD's top card, the RX 6900 XT, in a complex scene. And apparently, there was no difference in the final render quality either.
That's a huge gap, a mid-range card beating the flagship.
And it gets even more stark in some of the dedicated renderers. In Octane, RTX can sometimes more than double rendering performance. For Redshift, enabling optics almost mimics a GPU upgrade. And renderers like Arnold and Keyshot, they just automatically use this ray tracing acceleration if it's there.
Right.
Which is why, older cards that don't have this stuff, like the GTX 1080 Ti, they're noted as just not the rendering powerhouse it once was compared to the newer RTX cards. Okay,
so NVIDIA's lead seems pretty strong, especially in renderers that are built to use their specific tech. But what about renderers that support both AMD and NVIDIA? Does it level out there?
Well, not completely. Based on the benchmarks we saw, even in engines designed for both, like Blender Cycles, Radeon Per Render, LuxCore Render, NVIDIA's current cards often still seem to have a performance edge over AMD's latest. Like in a simpler Blender scene test, NVIDIA took a demanding lead. The RX 6900 XT even fell behind NVIDIA's lower-end RTX 3060 Ti in that particular test.
Huh. That's interesting. Even in AMD's own branded renderer, per render.
Yeah, one source actually noted that, quote, despite being a Radeon-branded renderer, NVIDIA's current-gen GPUs outpace AMD's latest and greatest a wee bit overall in those per render tests.
Huh.
And in LuxCore Render, while the Radeons were holding their own, NVIDIA clearly has an edge overall. It really seems like NVIDIA's current architecture and maybe their driver optimizations are just giving them a consistent lead for GPU rendering at the moment.
Okay, so the sources paint this picture. NVIDIA's ahead on speed thanks to those RT cores and optics. What about AMD? What are their key strengths in this comparison according to the material?
AMD's current generation, they definitely stand out with larger frame buffers offered overall. And that's a big deal, for artists dealing with absolutely massive scenes or super high-res textures.
Right. More memory is almost always a good thing in creative work, isn't it?
Exactly. And the sources also suggest there's potential for AMD to maybe close the gap with future improvements. There's a hint that in some cases, AMD drivers definitely need some polish to really unlock the hardware's full potential. Because the hardware itself, it's considered really competent.
Ah, okay. So the hardware capability's there, it just might need a bit more software optimization love in certain areas.
That seems to be a factor, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's also a potential bright spot looking forward. Blender's Eevee engine, which is different from Cycles, doesn't use RT cores right now. It's apparently going to transition to the Vulkan API.
Okay.
And experts noted this could very well see AMD sort of the top again or it'd be nice and exciting to see because AMD really does do well on Vulkan. Vulkan's a lower-level graphics API, and AMD's architecture has generally done pretty well there historically.
That could definitely shake things up, bring some more competition back into it. Any other quick hardware tips from the sources?
Just a couple of quick ones. For VRAM, the general feeling is that 8 gigabytes should be considered a bare minimum for creators today.
Makes sense.
The RTX 3090 was specifically called out as the ultimate creator card if VRAM is like your number one worry. And importantly, those workstation-specific cards, Radeon Pro or Quadro, they don't offer any additional benefit to rendering performance over the gaming cards, just for pure rendering speed.
Ah, interesting.
So gaming cards are often the more cost-effective choice in many situations.
Good practical advice there. You don't necessarily need that pricey Pro label just for the rendering horsepower. Okay, quick aside, we're focused on GPUs, but do CPUs matter much in these GPU rendering workflows?
Oh, they absolutely do, yeah. While GPU does the heavy lifting for the final pixels in most cases, the CPU is still crucial for, everything else. High-end multi-core CPUs, like, say, a Ryzen Threadripper, they significantly improve general responsiveness from applications and also viewport performance. Makes the whole interactive process way smoother.
Right, the actual working experience.
Exactly. And they can also provide a great benefit in rendering in those heterogeneous setups where you use both the CPU and GPU together to render.
Got it. So GPU first for render speed, but don't cripple your whole system with a weak CPU. Okay, let's switch gears then. The other half of this equation, the render engines themselves. Our sources really dug into comparing several popular ones.
Yeah, in this section, it gets complex because, like the sources said, comparing these engines fairly is just a mammoth task. So their approach, their methodology, it focused on finding which engine is the fastest most of the time, using just the standard default settings, the way most artists actually work, rather than relying on super optimized time-consuming setups. And they also use something called peak signal-to-noise ratio, PSNR, to make sure the speed comparisons were based on reaching a consistent level of image quality or cleanliness.
Okay, that makes sense. That approach feels more relevant for real-world users. What kinds of scenes did they actually test these engines on?
They looked at them across 4 different scene types, trying to pinpoint specific strengths and weaknesses. There's a basic Cornell box that's for simple light stuff. A scene focused on subsurface scattering, think like skin or wax. An environment volumetrics test for fog or smoke effects. And then a complex all-rounder scene meant to mimic a typical varied production shot.
Okay, comprehensive. Let's go through the profiles then. What did the sources say about Redshift?
Okay, Redshift. It's described as a biased GPU renderer. And the sources basically call it the speed champion.
Speed champion, okay.
Yeah, known for being lightning fast. It really shines when time is tight. Things like its adaptive sampling and its real-time viewport, they give major speed boosts. One source noted speed boosts of 40-50% over Octane, just in animation workflows.
Wow.
It's also praised for its integration, stability, efficient memory use, and scripting support important for big pipelines like in Maya. And bias renderers, just quickly, they use approximations in their math to get faster results, which is different from unbiased ones.
Gotcha. So speed and being ready for production pipelines, those are its main things. Any downsides mentioned?
Yeah, because it is biased, it requires tuning to get that absolute top-tier Fedorial look, meaning you kind of need to master the bias settings. It was also noted as being slightly less Fedorial out of the box compared to Arnold. And of course, like any GPU renderer, GPU memory is always a potential bottleneck.
Okay. So where is Redshift typically the go-to choice then?
Animation, ArchViz, really any heavy task with tight deadlines, and it absolutely crushed the volumetrics test. It was more than 4 times as fast as second place the GPU tests for that.
Right. Speed, volumes, deadlines. Got it. How about Octane then?
Octane. Now this one's an unbiased GPU renderer. Unbiased means it simulates light paths more accurately, which can lead to greater realism, but sometimes slower speeds. Octane is really celebrated for delivering stunning, realistic results and real-time updates, perfect for look dev and creative workflows. It apparently has beautiful color, supports spectral materials, and it's great for quick iteration because you see the results pretty much instantly.
Ah, it sounds perfect for artists really focusing on dialing in the look interactively. What are the trade-offs there?
The biggest one the sources flagged is that it requires high VRAM GPUs. This can really limit how complex your scenes can get unless you have some seriously expensive hardware. Some users, especially in Maya, also reported some stability issues. And because of those VRAM demands, it's considered less ideal for big animation jobs.
Okay, so fantastic for interactive look development, beauty renders, but hungry for memory and maybe less solid for huge animations. What about Arnold? That one feels like an industry standard, particularly in film, right?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Arnold is primarily an unbiased CPU and GPU renderer. It's definitely considered the industry standard in VFX and film. Its core strength is delivering flawless quality with strong support for volume, subsurface scattering, instancing, and large scenes. It's known for just rock-solid quality and being completely pipe-ready for those big studio workflows.
So quality and reliability are paramount with Arnold.
Exactly. It's the choice when quality is paramount and render consistency is essential. Now, while it does have a GPU version, the sources found it still trails biased GPU engines in speed like Redshift. And the CPU rendering side, it was also significantly slower than competitors like V-Ray and Corona in that complex all-rounder test.
So you choose Arnold when you absolutely need that top-level fidelity, no compromises, even if it means waiting longer for the renders.
That's often the trade-off,
Yeah.
especially in high-end film and VFX. Interestingly, though, the sources did note it has a surprisingly more user-friendly interface than Redshift.
Oh, that's a nice little detail. Okay, what about V-Ray? Another really common name.
V-Ray. It proved to be a really strong all-rounder in the tests they ran. In fact, it actually won the complex all-rounder test for both GPU and CPU categories.
Oh, wow. Both.
Yeah. It performed well across the different scene types and showed particular strength in subsurface scattering on CP5i. It also has some clever features, like secondary solvers, that can drastically cut render times in certain complex scenes, offering improvements of like a whopping 92% with no difference in quality in some cases.
Winning that key all-rounder test on both CPU and GPU, that sounds like a very competent, versatile option.
It definitely holds its own. The sources did mention its optics gains aren't quite as dramatic as an Octane, perhaps. But yeah, it's a very capable, versatile engine, performs well across the board.
How about Corona? I mostly hear about that one for architectural visualization.
You're spot on. Corona is a biased CPU renderer, and it's so beloved by archviz artists, mainly because it delivers excellent visual quality out of the box. You get beautiful photorealistic results with really minimal effort tweaking settings. It also won the environment volumetrics test specifically on the CPU side.
But mainly CPU focused then.
Yes, the test really focused on its CPU performance, as that's its main thing right now. And while it was slower than V-Ray in that all-rounder CPU test, its reputation for just easy, high-quality photorealism definitely stands.
Okay, moving over to Blender's own option, Cycles. How did that stack up?
Cycles, yeah. Blender's integrated CPU-TU renderer. It's open source, obviously widely used, and it benefits from development funding from both AMD and NVIDIA, which is great for its future. You know, the newer Cycles X version is showing some really promising performance improvements, especially in complex scenes, compared to the older version.
Okay. Any specific areas where the sources noted it kind of struggled?
Volumetrics. That was highlighted as a weak point. The sources said it's unreasonably slow at volumetrics on the CPU and not so great in GPU either. So while Cycles X is closing the gap, the overall base Cycles performance often lagged behind those dedicated commercial engines in the benchmarks.
Good to know for Blender users, especially if they're doing a lot of like fog or smoke effects.
And finally, LuxCore Render.
LuxCore Render. It's another unbiased, physically based CPU-GPU option. However, in the GPU performance tests that were reviewed, it consistently lagged way behind most of the others, pretty much across the board.
Oof.
One source noted it seemed to only perform competitively in the subsurface scattering test, but really struggled with, well, everything else.
So maybe a more niche or still developing engine compared to the big players, at least for general speed right now.
Based purely on the performance data from these specific sources, yeah, that seems to be the case. Okay, wow. So we've covered the GPU landscape, NVIDIA ahead on speed generally, AMD strong on VRAM with maybe some future potential. And we've profiled several major render engines, each with pretty distinct strengths and weaknesses. How does someone actually choose the right combination for their work?
Right, and this is the critical takeaway. The sources emphasize this again and again. No two workloads are always built alike. The best choice really depends entirely on your specific primary needs, your priorities. If you're doing tons of animation with tight deadlines where render time is absolutely everything, Redshift speed, especially with volumes, makes it a really strong contender. If you're focused on look development, quick, beautiful visual iteration for motion graphics or maybe stills, Octane is hard to beat despite that VRAM hunger.
Right.
If you're in high-end VFX or film where absolute verifiable quality is the main goal, Arnold is still the industry standard for a reason.
Yeah.
V-Ray is a really solid option if you just need strong performance across lots of different scene types. And Corona, well, fantastic for easy, high-quality photorealism and archviz.
And it's not always about just picking one engine and using it for absolutely everything, is it?
Not at all, no. The sources mentioned it's actually a very common practice in studios to combine engines within a single pipeline. Like, for example, you might use Redshift for animation passes, Octane for interactive look development, and Arnold for the final hero frames. You leverage the specific strengths of each engine for different parts of the job.
That makes perfect sense. Use the best tool for each specific task.
Precisely. And, while we're talking hardware, it's probably worth just briefly mentioning the current market. Sources confirm there are still ongoing GPU shortages, unfortunately. But there are real hints that the GPU supply situation should actually be getting a little better over the next few months.
Well, that's good news.
Hopefully. That might make getting your hands on the right card a little bit easier soon.
Fingers crossed on that one. Okay, so to kind of bring this whole deep dive together, NVIDIA currently holds a pretty significant lead in GPU rendering performance, largely driven by their RT cores and that optics API, offering speedups that are, as the experts put it, kind of hard to overlook and can really dramatically improve rendering performance. And this advantage often holds even in renders that support AMD too.
Right. And AMD's strengths. They lie in those larger frame buffers, great for complex scenes, and there's definitely potential for future gains through, continued driver polish and those upcoming API transitions like Vulkan and Blender Eevee, where AMD has historically done well.
And critically, your choice of render engine is just as important as your hardware. As we've seen, because no two workloads are always built alike, the best engine really depends entirely on your specific creative needs. Whether that's Redshift for speed and volumes, Octane for real-time iteration and beauty, Arnold for that uncompromised final quality, V-Ray as the solid all-rounder, Corona for archviz photorealism, or Cycles as Blender's improving integrated option.
And many studios strategically combine these engines, mixing and matching to maximize their respective strengths within their workflows.
It's definitely a complex but fascinating ecosystem. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a clearer map of the landscape based on what these sources found.
Absolutely. And, looking ahead, the experts noted something pretty fascinating about the future of rendering. As path tracers get closer and closer to real-time speeds, the next big hurdles, the big challenges to overcome, seem to be efficiently rendering caustics and volumetrics, those really complex light phenomena that are currently just incredibly difficult and slow to do accurately and fast.
Right. Caustics, like the way light focuses through a glass of water onto a table, that kind of thing. And volumetrics like fog or smoke.
Exactly. They require really computationally expensive calculations or tricky workarounds like photon mapping or special algorithms, which just drastically increase render times right now.
So the sort of final frontier for truly instant high-fidelity rendering seems to be mastering these really tricky light scattering and focusing effects.
It really raises an interesting question maybe for you to think about. What entirely new creative possibilities will open up when these complex light phenomena, things that are render killers today, can be generated instantly with high fidelity? How will that change artistic workflows, the types of visual stories artists can tell in real time?
That's a powerful thought to leave with. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
لایک و سابسکرایب یادتون نره مرسی